Hi, guys, and welcome to the third episode of Women in Nautica Boating from Brussels. We have Philip Easthill from the European boating industry with us on air today.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, hello. How are you doing?
Very well. Good to speak to you.
Yeah, likewise, likewise. We're looking forward to hearing a bit more about the boating industry from the regulatory side and what's been going on. So, some of the attendees of the conference, and also I think the broader public on LinkedIn knows you, but just for the new listeners, could you give a short introduction about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Philip Easthill, and I have the honor and pleasure to run European boating industry, which I've been doing for the last 5 years, since September 2019. And European boating industry is the European umbrella association of the recreational boating industry, the entire ecosystem of boating and nautical tourism, from marina to charter companies to boat builders, engine manufacturers, suppliers, distributors, and everything in between.
Amazing, great. And can you also tell us a bit about your educational background, how it led you to the place where you're at?
Sure. So I came to Brussels around 10 years ago. Beforehand, I did academic education in the United Kingdom, in Aston University in Birmingham, and I was studying business management and political science. So it's maybe an obvious connection to combine business and political science in Brussels by coming here and working in lobbying, which is what I did. So I started out working for 5 years, my first 5 years here in Brussels, working for a lobbying consultancy, or in other words, a public affairs consultancy. And there I was advising clients from companies to associations to NGOs on very different fields of policy to what I'm working on now. But I already had a bit of this experience in the field of public affairs and lobbying and regulatory side. And I have a personal interest also in sailing and boating. So I combined the two things together and found this job, which I'm still very happy in.
Great. And you mentioned lobbying. I think lobbying has quite a negative connotation in the sphere among people. So could you maybe break that bias that lobbying can also be used in positive instances?
Yeah, of course. So in my opinion, lobbying is a very natural and healthy part of the political process, because basically what it means is that everyone who's potentially affected by a piece of legislation has the opportunity to provide input. So it can be a country, a city, a region, a non-governmental organization, a consumer association, but also industry. So it's a natural part of the process that those who are affected have also a voice in the process. But at the end of the day, it's politicians, civil servants, elected politicians who take the decisions, and we can only provide the input. But we, as lobbyists, if we want to use that word, we have the responsibility to put on the table our concerns, our ideas, and then, as I said, elected politicians take the final choice.
Yeah, yeah. And now you're assisting with the work that you do, the associations of the boating industry. So, what are some of the perks for the Association of the Boating Industry to basically join EBI and also collaborate with projects and the European Commission?
Sure. So I think there's a very important connection to be made between the different countries and the different associations to work together, because we are an important industry, and I make that point very often in conversations with members of the European Parliament. But we're still a small niche within tourism, a small niche of the blue economy of tourism. So it's quite important that we have a common voice here in Brussels. So that's why it's really important to connect the national associations and to have one voice here in Brussels, so that we can talk on the issues that affect us, on sustainability, on taxation, tourism policy, licenses, and many other topics. But on the other side, it's also really important to be able to tell our members, to tell the companies, the association, what is going on in Brussels, so they have a bit of a longer term perspective and they understand what's coming down the road, how they need to be prepared for it, what regulation is coming, how can we support them with implementing the regulation in the companies. So that's kind of the dual approach. So it's kind of a upward translation of what are the needs of the industry towards Brussels in this case, but also a sort of downward conversation about what is coming, what can we expect, what do you need to be prepared for. And there's always this sort of term in lobbying, if you don't have a seat at the table, you'll be on the menu. So that's kind of, I think, quite correct and a very good way to summarize it. You have to be at the table of the point where decisions are being made. And in this case, this is in Brussels, but it's of course also in the national capitals in Zagreb and everywhere else around Europe where the industry has to be present.
Yeah, exactly. There's a similar analogy in the Croatian language that basically says if you don't step on the train, it's going to depart without you. So I think
I
that's,
much prefer that. I would take that in future.
and it's also great to hear that there's both a top-down and a bottom-up approach. I think that way you're not leaving anyone behind.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And the good thing about our industry is that it's a lot of small companies, right? A lot of what the Americans call mom and pop businesses. Um, so it's really difficult for them to obviously know what's going on in Brussels or even at any greater level because they're rightly occupied with the day-to-day business. So we have to break it down and make it very understandable what is really happening and not use big buzzwords, but to make it simple and understandable.
Yeah, yeah, just for the everyday people to have a good overview of what's going on. And
Exactly.
you mentioned a bit of blue economy. So a few days ago, I was approached by a PhD student, and they're writing their thesis, and it's also about blue economy. And there was a lot of questions. So should, let's say, stakeholders from the blue economy collaborate with governmental bodies or with private companies? Is there a sufficient link between the industry and the blue economy? I think that some people at the time being can say that blue economy is a term per se and that it's not as very well linked either with the existing businesses in the boating industry or with regulatory bodies. What's your take on that?
Yeah, and maybe a short explainer for your listeners, Anna. So, blue economy, what the European Union, the European Commission thinks about it, is that it's all activities somehow connected to the sea and the oceans. So, it's a quite wide definition of activities, going from offshore energy to aquaculture to deep sea mining, but also to sort of coastal and maritime tourism and shipbuilding. So, our industry falls into that because obviously we're very deeply connected to the ocean as an industry. So that includes, for example, under the shipbuilding category, obviously includes the yards, the supply chains, but also under the coastal maritime tourism topic and sort of bucket, it obviously includes the marinas, the chartered companies, the rentals, and all of these sort of companies. And I'm not sure how often it's used in sort of a national context, but it is quite often used here at European level to bring all of these different stakeholders together. In terms of real legislation, there's not so much, to be honest. It's more of a sort of a catch-all term to be able to talk between the different users of the sea. There's one maybe quite useful example. There's something called the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive. And sorry to be a bit technical here, but this is about defining the different uses at sea. So we have a limited sea space for countries, and there's a lot of competition for that sea space. So you have a lot of wind energy parks being built in the North Sea, but also around most of Europe. You have aquaculture, you have shipping lanes, and you have very many different activities. And of course, there's recreational use, touristic uses. So you have to manage that sea space in an efficient way. And this is what the directive does. So it has a sort of advice mechanism in there, consultation mechanism in there, so that you develop these plans for the sea space and you make sure that all the different users have a fair access to the sea. And that's really important for our industry to be part of that as well. So I think that's quite a good example of what the blue economy means in practice.
Yeah, and a very, very broad explanation because if you're looking at maybe a small charter business, it's a completely different way of work than from somebody who either produces wind turbines that are implemented onshore or offshore, and that are also like one part of the blue economy. It's quite different.
Of course, one is a sort of, to me, a multi-million, multi-billion company corporate, and the other is a small company with, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 sailing boats in the marina, charging them out in the season. So it's a very different type of business.
Yeah, I think there's only one thing in common, and that is the sea, that basically everyone is living off it. But I think more and more stakeholders need to realize that it's not only how to make business on the sea, but to find efficient ways to keep the sea as it is at the moment. So to just keep the diversity of marine species and just in general the conditions that we have at the moment. Of course, everything is slowly declining. We see it in Croatia as well, but also different invasive species which haven't been present in the Adriatic Sea that are coming in slowly, but it's a change. It's a process.
Of course, there's a lot of challenges, obviously for the sea space, but also the marine environment.
And when it comes to giving advice, how can EBI maybe help or connect someone who really wants to have advice on blue economy and maybe become a stakeholder or reach out to potential investors or just needs advice on EU projects? Is there somewhere where you can help with this?
Sure. I mean, we are here to help through our members to provide connections to all of these sort of actors. Also, we work closely with the European Commission and their arm of the European Commission that works on maritime affairs and blue economy. So we're always happy to help to reach out there.
Great. And can people find you in any of the boat shows as well?
Of course, we always try and EBI with our team of 3 people. It's a small but very powerful team. We try and attend the major boat shows. So we're now talking middle of December. So the next one for us will be Boat Düsseldorf, and that will be the next one where we will be attending and be quite active as well. But we attend also sort of all the other major boat shows in Europe, and we try and also look at all the different national boat shows and attend them from on a regular period.
Great. And I think that's also a good opportunity to boost collaboration between different countries. I was last year at the International Breakfast Meeting, and that was a great platform just to meet a lot of different people. So also from the blue economy, let's say more in the technical segment, and then the boating industry. So that was really, really great.
Yeah, that's great to hear, Anna. And this next Boat Düsseldorf in January 2025, we're again doing the breakfast meeting. The conversation this year, we had you last time on the panel. The conversation this year will evolve a bit from last year. So last year we talked about leadership, the next generation of leadership in the companies. This time around in January, we're talking about the next generation of customers, which obviously is a very important conversation for the industry to understand what do they look like, what are their values, their interests, and how do we target them as an industry? How do we get them interested in water sports and boating? So that will be at the breakfast meeting. We're also doing the Blue Innovation Doc for the third time in January 25. So that's also at Boat Düsseldorf for 9 days. We have different panel discussions, presentations, pitches, all around innovation, sustainability, and growing the industry in line with these objectives. And welcome everyone to attend that as well.
Great. So if anyone has the January blues, they're more than welcome to hop on a plane and go to Düsseldorf and get networking with the stakeholders in the boating industry.
Indeed.
Great. And can you maybe share what are some development plans for EBI for the following years? So we're looking at a lot of different regulatory changes, governmental changes. We have deadlines like 2030 for greenhouse gases, then 2050. So different milestones are in front of us. How does EBI work with these milestones, and what are some changes we can expect and also interesting projects?
Yeah, that's a great question, Anna. So maybe to start off with, I mean, we're now talking end of 2024, and about half a year ago, we had the European elections. The next European Parliament has been voted in. Since 1st of December, there's also a new European Commission at the political level in place. So all of that means that now Europe, the European Union, is sort of ready to run for the next 5 years until 2029. And we know that priorities are shifting a bit, I would say, at European level, but also at national level. The focus is still very much on the green transition, of course, on sustainability, but the new word is competitiveness. So how can we make sure that Europe is competitive at a global level against the major rivals, let's say, at a geopolitical level? But it's also very relevant for our industry because we are a very strong industry in Europe. We have a lot of production in Europe in terms of the yards, in terms of the supply chain. Obviously, the touristic aspect is incredibly strong in Europe, and I think it's quite competitive, but we have to keep it that way. So this is kind of a big developments in Brussels. And yesterday we spent a day in the European Parliament meeting a lot of newly elected members of the European Parliament, and it was really fascinating to talk to them. So we're now spending a lot of the time doing that, introducing our industry, making sure they know who we are, making sure they understand our priorities and we understand theirs. So there's a lot of this work being carried out. And we know that in the next 5 years, there will likely be legislation that will affect us as an industry. There's already legislation underway, a lot of legislation on the green transition, avoiding greenwashing, stopping greenwashing in product claims. So you can't just say my product is the most sustainable, you have to prove it, which I think is the right way to do it. But we also know that our sector-specific legislation, the Recreational Craft Directive, which is the CE marking you will find at the back of your boat, that's also being looked at again in the coming years to see if it's still up to scratch, if it has to be revised. So this is one of the big topics, and we know that sustainability, circularity will be among the priorities in the revision of that directive. So quite important that we keep a close eye on that and that we are very involved in that with our members.
Yeah, that's great to hear that things are being revised because, as you said, when sustainability got introduced as a term, a lot of people started using the term sustainable for their products when in fact they're not. And I think not only in the boating industry, but more broad, the term of greenwashing has been applied in a lot of companies and a lot of
Yeah.
campaigns. So we really need to target that. And then there's also the burning topic of recycling or reusing. I think there's also a lot of work being done on that, especially on the recycling of end-of-life boats. Is there something you can share on that?
Yeah, this is a big topic for us as an industry and for EBI as well. So how do we deal with those boats that reach the end of life and need to be dismantled and recycled? We have various pieces of work together with other industries that also use composites, like the wind energy industry. We are working with the European Commission on this. We have a joint network where we can talk together with the regulators at European and national level and our industry and the boat users and other stakeholders. But I think the messages on end of life of recreational craft and composites is really that recycling technology is there. I've seen dozens of different technologies that work, at least at lab scale, and some of them are ready for industrial scale. So the technology is there, and for example, cement co-processing of composites is a technology that's there today and has proven to be reliable and useful, and can take the volumes. But at the end of the day, the most important message is about the supply of composite waste. And we, as the boat industry, were by no means sufficiently large to actually provide a specific value chain, recycling value chain, just based on end of life boats. Is by no means enough. So we have to take the entire composite value chain into account. So everything from automotive to wind energy to other transport to electronics to tubing and construction and boating. And then if we pool all of this waste, then we can actually have a successful value chain in recycling.
And is it a matter of feasibility, like financial feasibility at the moment as well?
Sure, there's a business model behind it as well. That's quite important. We need to make sure that the dismantling is affordable for the final customer. That's a really important message. But yeah, there's a business model that's needed to support all of this, of course.
Okay, so there is hope for the environmentally conscious boaters that still love the sea, still love to boat, but are also considering what to do with their vessels once they don't use them anymore, or they reach their end of life, or they don't have an inheritor for them.
Yeah, I think that's it. And what we know though is that there's a theoretical end of life and a real end of life. We can take a number of X amount of years, but at the end of the day, unless the boat is really sinking, you will always find another owner for that boat. There will be someone who buys it off you off Facebook Marketplace for 1,000 euros, and suddenly there'll be another owner and another 5 years of the life of the boat, which is great and very particular about our industry. But yeah, I think there's a lot happening. We need pragmatic solutions as an industry that really work, and I think we can achieve that.
Yeah, and are there any initiatives on the reuse, but the reuse and great maintenance, let's say, something in that sort, so that it's not only about recycling, but also maybe letting people know that they should consider reselling their boat and then finding an owner who is going to put a lot of work into the maintenance or revamping some of the components and then just reusing it.
Yeah, and I agree. I think our industry is quite good at that. I mean, for larger vessels, the sort of concept of refit is already quite common. That you do a refit every couple of years and then it's like a brand new boat. And I think that's also the case for smaller boats. You will always find someone who's willing to invest the time to upgrade a boat, to use it again, to maybe even make the upgrade the hobby rather than boating the hobby. So I think there's always, yeah, there's always good news for another owner to be there.
Great. And also, some of the new owners are going to be young people. Young people, I think, are a burning topic also in the industry. I had the privilege to present to EBI project on this year's Biograd boat show in Croatia, and one of them is Takonaut. So, can you maybe share a bit how you're also trying to involve more young people in the industry proactively?
Yeah, so sure. So this is one of the challenges we identified is getting the new generation also into the industry, not just as users, which is important, but also into the industry to make sure we have the right skill set in the companies. And a good example is the Technonaut project, which is funded graciously by the European Union. It's a couple of million euros, I believe, over 3 or 4 years. And that project is all about new materials. So in composite use and other materials on a boat, what are the new materials? What is the skill set you need to work with those new materials, which might be different for glass fiber boats or resins compared to other type of fibers that you can use. So all of this knowledge needs to be available for the people in the companies working on these materials today, but also has to be part of the education of new boat builders and new technicians in the company. So we're doing both. We're building a curriculum and then a training course that can be part of the education within companies, sort of ongoing education, but also be part of the boat building curricula and vocational education training institutions across Europe. So that's a bit the idea. We're doing that together with different boat building companies, associations, universities, and different stakeholders. So it's quite an exciting project.
Yeah, and it's good that it has a collaborative approach. I know that several boat builders made like private academies, which is great, but I think this approach allows also for smaller stakeholders to have the opportunity to be on board because maybe a small shipyard that does 10 to 12 or 20 hulls per year even doesn't have the resources to do an academy but lacks the workforce.
Exactly. And I think that's a great thing about our industry. We have some larger players, which is important, but we also have a lot of small companies that, as you say, build 10 or even less boats per year. And we need to support them as well. And this is one of the ways we want to do it.
Nice. And now, if we're going a bit to the Women in Nautica project, unfortunately, you couldn't join us in person, but you joined online as a speaker on our Counter Perspective panel. So, how was that experience for you?
Well, it was a shame I couldn't be there in person. That's point number one. Obviously, those sort of conferences live through networking. The conference is important, but the networking is just as important. But from what I saw, it was really an excellent platform, not just to sort of highlight the contribution of women in the boating maritime sectors, but also to just understand what are the important challenges for the industry and how can we address them. So I think diversity of voices and a diversity of ideas is really, really important. And from what I could see and hear, the Women in Nautica conference achieved exactly that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, the key goal is to make the industry more inclusive and boost diversity. It's really not an initiative that tends to make the industry predominant with one gender, but just to make it more inclusive because I think that's what we need. And what you said also, like diversity brings new talent, new ideas, new development streams. So that's what we all need and benefit from.
Exactly. If you have an issue and you get people with different backgrounds, diversity of different types around the table, it will most likely increase the success of the outcome because you have different ideas and different approaches. So that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. And then for the listeners to get to know a bit your personal side, you're a skipper too.
Yeah, I am. I wish I would have a bit more time for that nowadays. But when I was growing up as a student and before at school a bit, I was working in Italy for a German sailing school. So I spent my summers working there, and then after university, I spent a full summer season working there as a sailing instructor on small boats, teaching families and kids, yeah, the skills of sailing and motorboating, teaching them licenses, official German licenses, but then also have the opportunity to take, yeah, a couple of sailing trips, longer sailing trips, 2 weeks around Corsica and Sardinia with a group of kids as a skipper, and that was very very hard work, but also a lot of fun. So yeah.
Yeah, I think great practice as well, just to be savvy on the boat.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I mean, you always encounter a lot of challenges as a skipper on different sides. The management of just the people on board, which is sometimes challenging, but also the boat itself, the weather, everything is really, really challenging, but a good challenge.
I can imagine. And do you boat in Belgium now? Do you go to the Netherlands? How's the boating in the western part of Europe?
Yeah, it's quite different. I mean, my boating comes really from my German side of the family, which is from Hamburg. So my grandparents in the 70s and 80s, they had consecutively, not at the same time, several sailing boats. So they had Halberg Racis, which is a great Swedish brand of sailing boats, still active today and really, really great boats. And they sailed a lot in the Baltic, around different Baltic countries up to Scandinavia. So that's a bit my sailing background. So the Mediterranean sometimes feels a bit hot. So then sailing in the Netherlands and Belgium is a bit more maybe my temperature. But yeah, it's also great to sail around here. Very different, of course, to the Med, but a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, and would you say then sailing is your favorite hobby, or is there something else?
Yeah, it's definitely my favorite hobby. As I said, I wish I'd have more time for it. I spend yeah more time closer to home because there's not a lake or river or the sea close by. I live here in Brussels, but it's only 1.5 hours to the seaside, so it's definitely manageable on the weekend.
Nice. And do you think starting as a skipper or just working on board is a nice way for young people to get acquainted with the industry and then moving from that forward?
Yeah, it's one of the ways to get into the industry, but there's dozens, if not hundreds, of different ways of getting into the industry. It depends on your academic background, your interest. If you want to first have a practical experience on a boat and then slowly get into the desk work, I guess there's very different ways into the industry. But it's a great way. I think it helps a lot to understand the industry if you are sort of close to boating or sailing, that helps a lot. But there's different ways of getting that.
Yeah, true. And then just building the love for the industry and the interest.
Yeah.
And then coming to the last question of today. So, building love and interest is something that takes time. And I think lot of young people can be quite overwhelmed in today's world with social media, digital presence, etc. What would you give as a advice to a young person who is currently struggling but would benefit from entering the industry and just start networking?
It's not an easy question, but I think there's a sort of a diversity of opportunities in the industry in terms of different ways to get into the industry, in terms of different job profiles. I mean, the job profiles in our industry are as diverse as maybe a few other industries because we have such a diversity of companies and profiles in the industry. So I think it's about trying out different yeah, jobs, different profiles, not stopping learning. I think there's a lot of opportunities to learn at boat shows, at different conferences, to stay curious, and I think that will serve anyone well starting out into the industry.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Great, great advice. So, where can people follow EBI?
So on LinkedIn and X, formerly Twitter, EBI has some profiles. We also have a monthly newsletter. So everyone's very welcome to follow us on those channels or to meet us as one of the upcoming boat shows.
Great. So, people are more connected, and then they know that boating is just not on the sea, but there's also a part of boating in Brussels. Thank you, Philip, ever so much
Exactly.
for being part of this episode and giving us some very interesting insights. And yeah, Guys, you can follow us as usual on Instagram. The username is WN_Women in Nautica, or on LinkedIn simply at Women in Nautica. Give us a follow and a review on Spotify, and stay tuned for the next episode. Bye.
Bye.